Well, thank you for joining me yet again. Once again, we have a hammer approach to a lesson where it's about what to do in difficult times, and it's primarily focused on financially rough times. But you know what? There are all kinds of rough times, and there are good ways to prepare for them, and good ways, at least better ways, to go through them. But that's our task for this lesson. What are we going to do in tough times? Of course, the key to all such things is to start as soon as possible. So let's get to it. Managing in tough times. Let's look at this right now. Offer to God thanksgiving and pay your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Psalm 50. And of course, this is honor God, offer to God thanksgiving and pay your vows to the Most High. The emphasis, of course, again, is on paying one's tithe, and that is important. But the offering here is thanksgiving, and if we give thanksgiving in good times, in good times, perhaps we will be able to do that in bad times as well. Let's take a look at that, because essentially managing in tough times involves these three things: our perspective, our expenditures, and our faith. But as it turns out, oftentimes because we have this materialistic approach and looking at money and stewardship as financial things, we forget that the real order of these things is quite different. The real order is that we should manage first in faith in our tough times, then the perspective will change, and that will change our expenditures in good times and in bad. And that, of course, is my concern, is how we live kingdom life in good and bad times, how we are stewards in good and bad times. And so the first one is our faith. And believe it or not, faith can be very difficult to manage in good times. Why do I say that? It is a tendency of human beings, we see this repeatedly, and I see it in my own life, unfortunately, to assume that good times are the norm, that they're always there, that the result of our wisdom and our good activities. And then when bad things happen, to think that someone else has done something wrong, or maybe God is picking on us. Or if we have a deep shame focus that, we've brought this upon ourselves. In fact, as the book of Job and other situations prove to us, bad times come to everybody. And they may or may not be the result of mistakes that we have made. But in either case, what we want is the kind of faith that in bad times can say what Job said. His wife said, "Curse God and die," which is, a natural reaction. It's not unreasonable. Lots of times sin is reasonable. It's just wrong. And so how do we have faith? Well, Job's faith, even in the face of these terrible things, losing his children, losing all of his belongings, and his friends condemning him. And he says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. I know that my Redeemer lives." So that is the hard part. How do we build the faith in the good times to deal with the bad times? And that's going to be true of all of these things. Because if we build our faith in the good times, it will be of great benefit to us in the bad times. If we build our perspective and get the right perspective in the good times, we will have a better perspective in bad times, viewing things. And if we are careful about our expenditures in the good times, then we will be able to continue through the bad times, unless they are cataclysmically bad, in which case, we'll get to that in a moment. So, when we talk about faith and managing our faith, the first thing is putting God first. Now, again, in this lesson, it's talking about paying your tithe first, which is a thing we ought to do. The Israelites paid the tithe on the first fruits, on the increase of their crops. And that is it. But putting God first is much more important than that. Putting God first is recognizing that everything we have comes from God. Recognizing that every good thing, whether it's financial or otherwise, the fact that we may live in peace, the fact that we have family, the fact that we have friends who support us, all of these things we must recognize that these are gifts of God, and therefore we are stewards of these things in good times and in bad. And really the question isn't so much who will stand by us in bad times as whom will we stand by when they are in bad times. Because that really is the test. God will always be there for everyone. He will be there for us. And Job, even though his friends deserted him, he stayed true to God. That's a difficult thing to do. But Job also says that he never saw those going hungry and didn't help them. He never saw people in distress that he didn't help. And so putting God first means serving him and serving his creation, stewardship to him in our everyday relationships, in our everyday lives, in our financial as well as other dealings. Putting God first and recognizing that all we have and all we are is here to glorify God and to build a trusting relationship with him and to show others how to do the same thing. That's putting God first. If we get in that habit, it won't go away. The habits you have in good times will stick with you in bad times, unless they're bad habits. And then that's one of the advantages of bad times, is that they sweep away things which are not good. Trust God, not your own resources. This is the thing. Yes, we need to put things by. We need to take care of things. We need to provide for the tough times. We need to save money. We need to build good habits. We need to invest in friendships. We need to do all of these things in good times. But we can't trust in those things. Nothing in this world can be trusted. We can't even trust ourselves if we're honest. And so we put our trust in God in the good times and recognize he's the one who's given us these things, and we should put our trust in him. This is interesting to me because before there was Facebook, I was involved in what was called a news group on the computer in 9/11. And people were saying, we have to go out and fill our tanks with gas, because we may have a shortage of gasoline. And I said, that's crazy. If there's the kind of problems you think are coming, one tank of gas isn't going to solve it. And that's exactly the kind of thing. And they say, well, what if, at least we'd have that tank of gas. What if things are as bad as we think? Well, then, things aren't going to work out well for anybody in any case. Another thing is whether you invest in things for your retirement, and you say, they say, well, the time will come when nothing's any good to us. Well, that may happen. When silver and gold are of no use, that will happen according to Scripture. It may occur in our lifetimes, it may not. But the point is, they say, well, there's risk in the stock market. Well, there's risk in everything you do, and if the economy collapses, you have more problems than to worry about your retirement. You have to worry about just surviving day to day. So understand these things. Our own resources, no matter how much we pile up, cannot protect us from true catastrophes. They happen. But we need to trust God through those. So get in the habit in the good times of giving God the credit. That's why it said offer him gratitude. Giving him our trust. And say, Lord, I'm doing this, but I understand you are the one that is going to preserve me if I'm preserved. You are the one. And if you don't, it's because there's a reason. Trust involves trust both ways, in good times and in bad. Secondly, we need to have perspective. We talk about poverty, for example, in the United States. There's nobody in the United States who is really, really in true poverty unless they choose to be. And I say this, I know people will be upset by it, but if you choose to be homeless, and there are many people who choose to be homeless, and you choose to be on drugs, and you choose to do certain things, then that's what you're going to have. You're going to have nothing else. But not only the safety net, but the economy is such that uh, even the poorest person, the person who lives beneath the poverty line, and I've lived beneath the poverty line many times during the years, but people have air conditioners and more than one car and television sets and things which the Caesars could not have imagined are at our fingertips. The fact that I'm on this podcast, on this YouTube video, is just as symbol of the fact that these things are things that even a generation or two ago one could not have dreamed of. To put on your own videos on a regular basis, as so many people are doing now around the world, 20 years ago would have cost you $15,000 or $20,000 minimum, and 10 years before that it would cost you $50,000 or $100,000, and now people can do it for very little indeed. Perspective helps us to understand that that we have things and the access to food and so forth that most people in most times have not had. And it's not all that long ago. When my wife and I moved to Minnesota in 1970, moved to northern Minnesota, and we soon discovered that in the wintertime, you just didn't have very much in the way of vegetables. Fruit and vegetables just weren't available there. You had some, but mostly it was canned and so forth. Now I live in Iowa. It's further south, but not a lot. And I can tell you the climate's not a lot warmer here. And we have fresh strawberries 12 months of the year. I can go to the local store in a small town of 5,000 people, and I can buy fresh strawberries. When I was a child in the 1950s and 60s, we got strawberries once a year, and they were frozen in little rectangular boxes like this. And that was a big deal. That was exciting. The strawberries came, and you had them for like 2 or 3 weeks, and you stocked up on those frozen strawberries. It's what you had. Now, as I say, we have them pretty much 12 months a year. And I could go on about the things that are available to us. And that's a matter of perspective. Now, not everybody in the world has that. We need to recognize that. And that's why we need to be in the habit of helping those who are less well off in this country and in others. But you also do it in the perspective of having a relationship with them in that context. Building relationship to bless them, because God blesses us. Freely we receive, freely we should give. So perspective is realizing, if you don't have air conditioning when you want it, people never used to have it at all. Again, in the 1950s, air conditioning, even in businesses, was fairly rare. I remember it very well. So perspective is a matter of seeing where we really are in the scheme of things. And we'll get to more details on all this in just a moment. And finally, expenditures. And these are things, these are topics that we have in the lesson. The putting God first, trust God, not your own resources. And here we have, is it time to simplify? And I'm going to say, yes, it's time to simplify in tough times, but it's time to simplify before that. Because if you simplify before that, if you learn to live on a minimum, having true food and raiment, let us therewith be content. We'll get to that text in a moment. If you learn to do that in the times when times are good, you can set money aside and other things aside so that you are not subject to these ups and downs. When I was a school principal in Christian schools, one of the problems that we had was I was the principal of a 3-teacher school. But the problem is that we were subject to enrollment. We might have a year or two where enrollment went down, even though we could see, because of the babies in the church and the young people, that we would have another bump in the, leap in the enrollment in a couple of years. But because of the way the finances were structured, we couldn't afford it. And once you stopped funding a teacher, it was very difficult to start it up again. The record was not good. So I suggested to the school board, because of some circumstances we were bringing in excess income, I suggested that we set some aside in a fund so that we could continue to have 3 teachers, even if the enrollment went down for a year or 2. And then when that passed, when the enrollment was up again, we would have the teachers. But if you don't keep the teachers, you only have 2 teachers, then you can't handle the enrollment. And people see the size of this classroom, and they know you can't do it, so you don't get the students. And it's a self-fulfilling downward spiral. The same thing could be true if you made sure that you had some for a rainy day. What happened to that proposal? Perhaps sometime I'll tell you. But the idea is for all of us is if we can live on the minimum and put away the maximum, then we're in a position to deal with tougher times. Now, obviously, again, if things get to a certain point, we'll have other concerns. But we can make things easier for ourselves by controlling expenditures and the time to do that, the time to simplify. Yes, you'll probably we might eat out less often, for example, during tough times, or we might have to change somewhat of our dietary intake. But the point is, if you learn how to do this in the good times and put money aside, then when the bad times come, you still are equipped to move that way. The time to simplify is always now. And this, by the way, is in line with the whole idea of Scripture. Today is the day of salvation. Now is the time, not sometime in the future. And so all of these things, building your faith, getting a perspective, and learn time to simplify, these are all things that can be done and should be done right now. The sooner the better. And then the next one is priorities. Determining what matters most in your life. And you should do that again in times when there's abundance, because you can get your priorities, you can simplify your life, and you can still put aside things for difficulty. You may say, well, the Bible doesn't talk about this. Well, the Bible doesn't talk about finances exactly because they didn't have the same kind of monetary system and all that. But we do see in Proverbs, go to the ant, thou sluggard. The ant builds up things for the future. Is the whole point of that example, whereas this grasshopper just consumes for the moment. And so, yes, God is not opposed to prosperity. What he's opposed to is that we trust in it. He is not opposed to money. It is not money which is the root of all evil, but is the love of it. And we see the same thing in every realm. In one of the Psalms, it says that men trust in horses and chariots. Well, you might as well say that human beings trust today we trust in fighter airplanes or missiles and tanks. That's the kind of thing they were talking about. That was their strength. But our trust must be in the Lord. And so, yes, we must provide for security. We must provide for all of these necessities of life. But we must understand that God is the final arbiter. It is our job to provide, but it is his job to save. And when we are saved, it is by the grace of God, even though we have planned for it and set aside. If our plans work out perfectly, we can thank God that he gave us the wisdom to do this and the means to do it when times are good. And we're going to examine that here in a little bit of perspective. Matthew 6, putting God first. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Okay, this is right down there to the fundamentals. What shall we eat? What shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Food and clothing. There you are. And of course, that was in a fairly warm climate, so they didn't have to worry about shelter in the same way that we have to. But we could certainly add shelter to that. Where will we live? And we don't have to worry so much about that. For your heavenly Father knows that you need them. God knows what we need. He knows human need better than we do ourselves. And that matters. But seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. This is Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, does this mean that no Christians ever starve to death? No. The devil is active. But God will provide for our needs. And don't forget, this world is not our home. We are pilgrims. We are strangers. And we know this. We feel every time someone close to us dies, we feel that things are just plain wrong. There's something wrong about this. It isn't the cycle of life. We may accept the fact of our own mortality, may recognize that's going to happen. At the same time, we do recognize that we were not meant to say goodbye. That's why we grieve so strongly. We were not made for this world of death and sin. Sin and death are intruders. Life and abundance is what God offers us. And so these things will be provided as we need them. But if we seek first the kingdom, then we can be assured that whatever happens to us in this life, however terrible it may be, that the kingdom is ours. And that this life of 80 years, as the psalmist says, 75 to 80 years, that's just a blink of the eye. Just a blink of the eye. And as someone who's the first digit of my age is 7, I'd say, yeah, it's just a blink of the eye, how quick it passes. So seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. Everything else will be added to you. So there we are. Don't worry about it. This is the end then. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. That's really true, isn't it? Each day has enough trouble of its own. And worrying about tomorrow, and it's something I do. It's something I learned from my parents. I'm not blaming them, just saying that I saw them worry, and I worry. And the problem is that worrying can't change the future. Well, it can wear you down, make your future worse. But you can't do much about it in the present. You can do things concretely. We talked about preparing, simplifying, and so forth. But let's look at a concrete example of this, because it's really interesting. This is what God said to Noah. Make yourself an ark. There's a flood coming. That's tough times. Nearly everybody and every animal on the planet will die. That's about as tough as it gets. So prepare yourself for it. God gives him the wisdom and the plan. But Noah has to build the ark. And as we'll see, as I've said this before, the ark didn't save Noah. And we'll find that here in the text. But first of all, let's just look at what it says. Make yourself an ark, he says. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. So God says there's a flood coming. It's going to destroy every kind of animal life. Well, at least not counting the fish, I suppose. But it's everything that creeps on the earth and the birds and all of those things. You're to make an ark so that they can survive with you. When you come off the ark, there will be an entire ecosystem available because you will have preserved it on the ark, or it will be preserved on this ark. You are to take every kind of food. God is not going to feed them miraculously. He's not going to float them miraculously, and he's not going to feed them miraculously. Build the ark. Bring the animals, although God will help with that. Take the food you need. This is to be eaten and stored away as food for you and for them. So bring along food for you and for all the animals. That's your job. That's what I want you to do. And then Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And then Noah goes on. We talked about this before. This building the ark and going on the ark are acts of faith. They are acts of faith. Faith saves us because God honors it, not because the actions themselves are sufficient to save us. No works of any kind will save us. And as important as the ark was, and it was, Provide for the future. This is the thing. Simplify. Make a space for you to live. Take the food you need to live. And then go on this ark. Okay? But you can't live there forever. You can't stay on the ark forever. And it rains. And it rains. And the people who aren't in the ark all perish. And it keeps raining. And the floods rise. And the floods rise. And here's the key. Yes, Noah had to do these actions, but they did not save him. God's grace saved him. And in the middle, I could go into, there's a wonderful chiasm discovered by Arthur Furch, showing how the story of the flood centers on this text. God remembered Noah. Wow. And all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. God remembered the life that was on the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. The waters receded. By the way, he sent a wind. The wind is ruach in Hebrew, and ruach is spirit. There's just like before creation, the spirit, or at the beginning of creation, the spirit hovers over the waters, and the waters retreat because of that. He sent his spirit, his wind, his breath over the earth, and the waters receded. Noah is saved by God's breathing on the waters because the ark was enough to preserve them for a time, but not forever. The act of faith that Noah did in preparing the ark the ark was honored by God's grace. But it is always God's grace and always God's power. And that will be true through the next recession and the next depression and through the time of trouble and forever. That it is God's grace that gives us life. Life everlasting. But it was important. It was important that Noah built the ark. It was important that he stocked it with provisions. And saying this, I've got to tell you, because it's getting closer yet, and that is a living legacy at Journey's End. Okay, we have it. Okay, so first of all, it took a long time to build the ark, 100 years. It takes a long time to save up for your retirement. It takes most of your adult life if you're going to do that. Start building a legacy in your family, your children, your grandchildren, as soon as you can. So you can say, well, I'm young, I don't even have children yet. That's right. Begin to prepare for that now. Learning how to save a legacy. This is just like saving for retirement. The earlier you start, the longer you are at it, the better you get, the better you can do. Your efforts will not save your children. Only God can do that. But your efforts, like Noah's building the ark, can be acts of faith which help to preserve it. They are used by God to save you. The ark was used by God to save Noah. Well, the ark, the efforts that you learn how to build a legacy, and I have 5 steps, the 5 R's I call them, and people have told me again and again, these things really work. Now, I'm not talking about ultimate salvation because nobody knows that, but they can see the results in the character and the attitudes and the lives of their children and grandchildren. And that is a great encouragement to everybody, let me tell you. So if you want to be part of this webinar, it may be later in the spring now because my wife is having surgery and I have to take that into account. But it should be in the month of May. And that is, if you want to be a part of that, then send an email to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com and put Legacy Webinar in the subject line. And I will be sending out emails soon to everybody on that list, giving them some updated information and some preview of some of the concepts that will be shared in this. So if you want to be part of that, if you want to start now for the tough times, because there's always teenage years. There are problems when you are the parent of being a parent of an adult child who is married. People don't get how challenging that is. I used to think being a parent of a toddler was tough. Being the parent of a teenager, we didn't have a great deal of trouble with, but some. But being a parent of adult children is much more taxing. It can be much more rewarding as well. I'm not saying I have problems with my children or their spouse. What I'm saying simply is that it's a much more challenging, it's a different role, and most people aren't prepared for it. All these things will be covered in this webinar, and that the details will be, I'm going to start releasing those. So again, send an email to BibleJourneys@yahoo.com and put Legacy Webinar in the subject line. Expenditures, time to simplify, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. This is Paul's advice to his spiritual son, Timothy. And it's important to understand this. Begin making the changes now. Now is the time of salvation. Now is the time to prepare for the tough times. You can manage in tough times better if you start managing for tough times now. There's plenty of wisdom literature in Proverbs and others on handling your finances. You can get wisdom from many sources, as did people in the Old Testament time. The wisdom in Proverbs, for example, is very similar to wisdom literature in many cultures. People understood how life works better. But it is subject to all things being equal, and things aren't always equal. And those are the tough times. So you prepare by doing the things that do work most of the time, especially when you're in times of prosperity, so that when the difficult times come, it's easier. Never easy, easier. Managing for tough times starts in the good times, if you're blessed. So that is my message for you today. Begin now. We can provide for a future. Hopefully we can provide for a future even into eternity, for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, for others that God sends into our lives. Let's learn how to do that now. Perhaps we will be spared tough times, but if we are not, we want to prepare them for tough times. And there are always plenty of trials to go around. So let's learn to live kingdom life in this world, in good times and in bad. Thank you for joining me. We're almost the last lesson for this series. I hope you can join me again in a few days for another Bible journey.